In June of 1965, a Green Beret was lying in a dry rice paddy near the Bong Son area of Vietnam. He'd been shot in the right knee and foot and was knocked unconscious when another round grazed his skull. Many would think this is the end, but in reality, this was just the beginning for this Green Beret. This video is about the legendary William D. Waugh. During his 60-plus years with the U.S. Army and CIA, which spanned from 1948 to agency operations into the early 2000s, Billy Waugh earned numerous awards, which include 8 Purple Hearts, 1 Silver Star, 4 Bronze Stars for Valor, 4 Commendation Ribbons for Valor, 14 Air Medals for Valor, 2 Combat Infantry Badges, and many other awards which are still unknown to the public. In 2001, at 71 years old, Waugh deployed to Afghanistan during the initial push with Special Forces Operational Detachment Alpha, or ODA 594, as a CIA independent contractor. Their job was to train the local population to hunt Osama bin Laden and battle al-Qaeda and Taliban forces, a skill Waugh has completed many times before, the first being in the late 1950s with Special Forces. While conducting research for the book Surprise, Kill, Vanish, author Annie Jacobson sat down with former U.S. Department of State Coordinator for Counterterrorism, Cofer Black. Black told Jacobson, "Too bad you only know 1/100th of what Billy Waugh has ever done." Black explained most of what Waugh did was on verbal orders from someone like him to someone like Waugh, so nothing was ever written down. This is his story. Waugh's story begins on 1 December 1929 in Bastrop, Texas. 10 years later, in 1939, Waugh's father passed away. Waugh started working at a young age to help support his family. On 7 December 1941, Waugh was working in a local movie theater. That day, the sheriff walked into the theater and announced the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor and the United States was at war. He continued another attack on the United States was anticipated by Japanese forces, which might be followed by an invasion. The sheriff then ordered everyone to go to their homes, cover their windows with black material so no light could shine through, and initiated a curfew. Waugh helped close the theater, then went home. He helped his mother cut up some black fabric to cover the windows of their small, one-bedroom apartment and learned where Hawaii was at. In 1945, just before Waugh's 16th birthday, 2 wounded Marines returned to Bastrop from World War II. Seeing these Marines encouraged Waugh to find a way to enlist. He knew he couldn't enlist in Texas due to his age, but had heard you could enlist in Los Angeles at 15 or 16, and in his young mind, the math checked out and he was off. Waugh made it as far as Las Cruces, New Mexico before he was picked up by police.
Because I didn't have any money.
Fearing the beating his mother would give him, Waugh refused to tell police his name or age, so he was arrested and put in jail. Although Waugh managed to convince the police to take him to a Marine recruiter so he could enlist, the recruiter laughed in his face and he was put back in jail. Finally, Waugh broke down and called his mother to ask for money for a bus ticket home. The police let Waugh go, and he went back to Bastrop via bus. Waugh graduated school in 1947 and enlisted in the United States Army shortly after. In August of 1949, Waugh shipped off to Fort Ord in California for basic training, and then to Fort Benning, Georgia for airborne school. He was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division at Bragg in North Carolina. As a kid, Waugh read about the airborne jumps in World War II and dreamed about being a paratrooper ever since. Waugh left for the Korean War in 1951 as part of the 187th Airborne Regimental Combat Team. In Korea, Waugh experienced combat, and in his book, he wrote, "For the first time in my life, I felt completely at home." Waugh also joked about jumping out of all kinds of aircraft, but not experiencing a landing until he came back from Korea. In 1953, after the Korean War, Waugh was a sergeant first class and assigned as a platoon sergeant in Germany. One day on a train ride, Waugh ran into 2 soldiers wearing a weird patch on their shoulders. He inquired about the patch, and they told him they were part of a new group called Special Forces, also known as Green Berets, or SF for short. Waugh went to check on this unit firsthand, and once he got there, he knew he had to join them. In 1954, Waugh earned his Green Beret and joined the 10th SF Group. At some point after joining SF, Waugh was transferred to the 1st Special Forces Group in Okinawa for Special Atomic Demolition Munition, or SATM training. Waugh became a team leader for an ODA codenamed a Green Light Team, which could deploy a tactical nuclear bomb, the Mark 54 SATM. While on the Green Light Team, Waugh was taught SATM airborne operations, combat swimming and diving, which included wet deck launches from U.S. submarines, and alpine or cold weather operations. This training provided the skills needed for the secret deployment of a tactical nuclear weapon. In 1961, Waugh received TDY, or Training Deployment Yearly Orders, to Vietnam. In reality, he was to be part of a secret CIA operation in Laos, known at the time as Project White Star. This was a relatively small operation which was first known as Project or Operation Ambidextrous. Personnel used for this were designated as advisors, who were mostly agency personnel. They had to be in no way active duty military personnel, so they were not in violation of the Geneva Treaty. Once Japan was defeated in World War II, the French tried to reclaim the area of Southeast Asia. After losing the Battle of Dien Bien Phu to OSS-trained Ho Chi Minh and General Vo Nguyen Giap's communist forces, the French pulled out of Southeast Asia. Once the French left, the U.S. started placing personnel into areas such as Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. But these operations had to be kept secretive due to the Geneva Accords, which were signed in 1954. These accords also declared the countries of Laos and North Vietnam as independent countries. This meant military aid from the United States and North Vietnam were supposed to stop to these countries too, but that didn't happen. Ho Chi Minh wanted a united Vietnam. The West feared the spread of communism throughout Southeast Asia. Laos and Cambodia were also important because of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The HCM Trail was used to funnel troops and equipment into South Vietnam. In response, the United States started to support the Royal Lao Army, who were fighting the communist path at Lao. To keep these operations in Laos unknown to the public, it went through several name changes. What started out as Operation or Project Ambidextrous was then renamed Operation Hotfoot in 1959 and finally was known as Project White Star in 1961. An increase in staff was needed for Operation Hotfoot, so 12 SF mobile training teams arrived in mid-1959 with Lieutenant Colonel Arthur D. Simons giving on-site supervision. Bull Simons is another SF legend. If you don't know about the Bull, he's worth looking up. Waugh describes the Bull as a large and forceful man and someone you didn't trifle with. In 1961, John F. Kennedy was elected president. About 2 weeks after his inauguration, Kennedy requested 9 more training teams be sent to Laos. Later that year, Waugh and about 110 other Green Berets were given a cover as land surveyors and sent into Laos to train Royal Laos soldiers to fight against the Pathet Lao and North Vietnamese forces. In 1962, Laos officially became a neutral country, and all American personnel were pulled from being active participants in combat operations. After Laos became neutral, at some point, Waugh went back to Okinawa, but in 1965 was sent into Vietnam and assigned to an SFA camp near the Bong Son area of the Binh Dien province. This area was very active because it was deep in VC country. In June 1965, an intel operation revealed a North Vietnamese encampment about 11 miles east of Bong Son towards the South China Sea. 3 huts were observed and housed an estimated 200 to 300 NVA soldiers with Chinese advisors. A raid was planned for the encampment, and at 0100 hours on 18 June 1965, Waugh, along with 3 other Green Berets and 86 Civilian Irregular Defense Group or Indige mercenaries, set out on foot to raid the encampment. All had an M16, 25 magazines, each filled with 20 rounds of ammo, 10 frag grenades, 2 white phosphorus grenades, 2 smoke grenades, a mirror, a flare, an emergency panel, and a compass. About 2 miles outside the wire of the SFA camp, they discovered an NVA sentry. Luckily for them, the NVA medic was asleep. This was the first time Waugh and the others came across an NVA soldier and were surprised by the equipment he was carrying. The NVA medic's bag was filled with similar equipment U.S. medics carried at the time. He also had new boots, a new uniform, and a Chinese pistol. Since the sentry was asleep, no warning was given to the NVA encampment. He was unalived in the quietest of fashions. Then Waugh and the others pressed on. At about 0430, the group came across 2 cooks who were preparing food for the NVA soldiers. These cooks were again welcomed by the Unhealthcare Committee. Waugh and the others then silently went into the camp. They broke off into 3 groups, 1 group for each of the NVA huts. As they entered the huts, they saw the NVA soldiers fast asleep. Once inside the huts, Waugh and the rest of the team threw frag grenades and mag dumped their M16s. They just changed out mag after mag until there was no more movement. After the shooting stopped, Waugh heard bugles. From his experience in Korea, he knew bugles meant a shitstorm was coming. The excitement from what they thought was a well-conducted raid went to GTFO in a hurry. What Waugh and the others didn't know is these huts were not the only ones there. They were the only ones which could be seen. Later reports confirmed there were an estimated 4,000 NVA soldiers in the encampment who were sleeping in other huts, hidden in the jungle. Waugh and the others started running as fast as they could to get away. They ran through a dry rice paddy to a rally point. Green tracers from AK-47s and RPKs along with RPG explosions were coming in all around them. During this escape, the group's radio had taken hits and was inoperable. They had no way of calling in fire support or extraction. As Waugh booked it across that dry rice paddy, he took a round to his right knee, knocking him to the ground. Moments later, as he crawled through the rice paddy, he took another communist tracer round to his right foot. The bullet had entered his foot and exited at his ankle, shredding his boot, bones, and skin. At this moment, Waugh had an aw shit moment and realized this is where he was going to die. As the sun was coming up, Waugh saw F-8s and F-4C jets coming in, dropping some spicy sauce on the battlefield. Air support was called in by the Forward Air Controller, or FAC, who was monitoring the mission. Just as Waugh was enjoying the might of this aerial power, he went unconscious. A communist round hit Waugh on the head, grazing his skull. It hit hard enough to knock him unconscious, making him appear very dead. This might just have saved his life. Hours later, Waugh woke up naked in the rice paddy. While Waugh was unconscious, the NVA got to his body. Seeing all his injuries and face covered in blood, they took him for dead and stripped him of all of his clothes and equipment. When Waugh woke up by using the position of the sun, he swagged he was out about 8 hours. U.S. helicopters were landing all around him, and he was being pulled to the chopper by other Green Berets. Waugh was thrown into the helicopter on top of other bodies, then bodies were thrown on top of him. Still being mindful of the situation he was leaving, Waugh put out a radio message requesting 30 caliber machine guns and radio equipment to the others still on the ground. This raid had an 80% casualty rate, with only 18 leaving out of the original 90 that went in. And those 18 who left, all left the battlefield by stretcher. Waugh's first stop was a field hospital. There, a nurse took one look at him and screamed. He was covered in mud, dried blood, and leeches, but he was happy to be alive. At the field hospital, Waugh drifted in and out of consciousness. It was during this time Waugh was awarded his 6th Purple Heart by General Westmoreland. Waugh was transferred to the Walter Reed Hospital and was placed in the lower extremity amputee ward. Waugh knew what this meant, and he had to get better quickly before his military career was ended. He had to get back to Vietnam. During this stay, Waugh took convalescent leave. He told the doctors he wanted to go back to Texas to start healing. Waugh made sure he had the country of Vietnam listed in the allowed to visit section on his convalescent leave orders. After a 4-flight journey, Waugh landed in Vietnam and met up with his SF friends at the sporting bar on Tudo Street in Saigon. While drinking with his friends, they lost track of time and the midnight curfew. 2 MPs entered the bar shortly after midnight and asked them for their after midnight authorizations. Waugh's buddies pulled out their Waugh walk-on water passes. It was then Waugh learned about SOG, the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, otherwise known as MACV SOG, was a top-secret unit started between 1963 and 1964 and ran reconnaissance, direct action, and rescue missions across the fence into Laos and Cambodia. Their mission was to collect intelligence and disrupt operations along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. SOG was ran by the agency and the 5th Special Forces Group. After Laos was declared neutral in 1962, U.S. personnel were pulled out, but it was quickly realized the enemy was increasing troops into Laos, so the U.S. did as well. However, there were some stipulations. SOG operators couldn't have anything linking them to the United States. They had no unit patches, no dog tags, and their uniforms were sterile. The weapons they used were either not manufactured in the United States or the serial numbers were wiped clean with no record. Even the Army post office number they listed was in San Francisco, California, not Vietnam. SOG had such a high casualty rate, many called it suicide on ground. SOG operations across the fence were so secretive, they were not officially acknowledged by the United States government until the mid-1990s. Waugh's friends had been assigned to MACV SOG. Every SOG man had a Waugh pass, which allowed them to basically do anything in Vietnam. They could carry weapons wherever they went. They were not affected by curfews or area restrictions, and they could order any official or policeman to transport them anywhere. After Waugh's friends were in the clear, the MPs asked for Waugh's orders. Waugh produced his convalescent leave orders and pointed to the section allowing unlimited stay in Vietnam. This threw the MPs OODA loop off track. So off track, the MPs radioed their CO for instructions. The CO radioed back and told the MPs if Waugh isn't causing any trouble, to leave him alone. The MPs refolded Waugh's orders, gave them back to him, and left the bar. Shortly after, Waugh returned to the United States. Back in the States, Waugh met Billy Alexander during a visit to the Pentagon. At the time, Mrs. A was kind of a big deal in the SF community. Mrs. A was working as a Special Forces Non-Commissioned Officer or NCO Assignment Officer, which meant she was a person to contact if a Green Beret wished to go to Vietnam. Normally, after she cut orders for a Green Beret to go to Vietnam, it was customary for them to send her flowers, and legend has it, her office was full of flowers. Mrs. A told Waugh about the start of Op 35 with MACV SOG. They needed 120 senior SF NCOs for this part of SOG. Op 35 would operate in Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam, conducting covert operations such as rescuing downed pilots, reconnaissance, and other missions against the NVA along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and Waugh wanted in. Waugh was able to strike a deal with Mrs. A. The deal was, if Waugh could pull duty for 1 month with the 7th SF Group at Bragg, Mrs. A would cut him orders for SOG. Mrs. A agreed. Waugh then had to get better in a hurry. With his foot still infected and the infection not responding to medications, the docs wanted to amputate his foot. Waugh struck another deal with the doc to give him some more time to heal. During this, another surgery was performed on Waugh, which removed a small part of his boot that was lodged in his knee. After this was removed, Waugh's infection started healing. In a couple of weeks, the wound stopped draining and closed, and in September of 1965, Waugh showed up for duty with the 7th Group at Bragg. A month later, he was on his way to Vietnam. In May of 1966, his first assignment with SOG was Airborne Coordinator of SOG Operations at the training ground at Long Than. At this time, Waugh was still limping, and the wounds in his foot and ankle became infected again. 2.5 months after landing at Long Than, he went to visit the CO of SOG, which, at the time, was again Colonel Bull Simons. After calling Waugh a dumb shit for requesting a transfer into a more active position with SOG due to the fact Waugh was still limping, the Bull let Waugh take over duties as a SOG Airborne Coordinator at Khe Sanh. And just like that, Waugh was back in, running ops with SOG into Cambodia, Laos, and North Vietnam. With SOG, Waugh was involved in numerous operations, one of which was Oscar 8. Oscar 8 was SOG's attempt to end the Vietnam War by capturing General Giap. SOG believed capturing or killing Giap at a location codenamed Oscar 8 would cripple the North Vietnamese command, leading to the end of the war. However, Oscar 8 was more heavily defended than thought, leading to heavy U.S. casualties during the Oscar 8 mission. Waugh was also involved in the combat halo jumps conducted by SOG in the early 1970s. In the later half of 1960, SOG had a hard time inserting any recon team without them getting into enemy contact shortly after insertion. SOG needed to find another way of insertion, and they decided that would be Halo. Waugh oversaw the training and selection of the Halo teams. SOG's Halo jumps into Vietnam were the first of their kind because they were conducted at night. The nighttime Halo book was written by SOG as they went. Jumping out of a plane at 19,000 feet into complete darkness presents its own level of difficulty. For instance, they didn't have any night vision, so they couldn't see shit. Regrouping in the air and landing as a team in the same area proved almost impossible. The first combat Halo was conducted by Recon Team Florida on 28 November 1971. For more information regarding the first combat Halo in Vietnam, click the link above. On 22 June 1971, the third combat Halo was conducted by Sergeant Major Billy Waugh, Staff Sergeant J.D. Bath, Sergeant Jesse Campbell, and Sergeant Madison Stroline. Before their jump, the team was talking about strategies to try and regroup once on the ground. Waugh cut the conversation short by telling them, "Sometimes you have to have a set of balls and do it alone." And off they went. During that mission, Sergeant Stroline landed in a tree. It is assumed Stroline sustained some kind of injury during landing. A bright light mission, SOG's codename for a rescue mission, was delayed due to weather. By the time they got to Stroline's crash site, he was gone. Stroline's weapon and evidence of a firefight were at the location, but no trace of Sergeant Stroline. Sergeant Stroline remains missing in action to this day. With the Vietnam War winding down, and after 7.5 years in Vietnam, Waugh returned to Fort Bragg in December 1971. At Bragg, Waugh was informed he was being reassigned to the 10th Special Forces Group at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Waugh felt his home was with 5th Group, and he went as far as the Pentagon to try and get these orders changed. In January 1972 at the Pentagon, Waugh spoke with General Westmoreland, who said he'd be surprised if Special Forces even survives. Waugh returned to Fort Bragg, where he retired from the military on 1 February 1972. At his retirement, Waugh and some friends haloed into the parade grounds at Bragg, and then spent the rest of the day drinking beer and telling stories. At 43 years old, Waugh retired and returned to Texas in 1975, where he found employment with the U.S. Postal Service. If you think this is the end of Billy Waugh, think again. Part 2, The Agency Years, is coming soon. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. In the meantime, if you want to know more about Billy Waugh, you can read Billy Waugh's book, Hunting the Jackal, Annie Jacobson's book, Surprise Kill Vanish, or SOG by John L. Plaster. The website sogsite.com has a lot of information as well. Links are in the description below. Thank you for watching. Until next time, Trash Panda Actual, out.